Friday the 13th, the Midnight Memoirs. In a small town called Auburn, the legend of Friday the 13th was not like any other. Here, it was believed that on this day, at the stroke of midnight, one would receive a memoir, a tiny black book detailing an event that had yet to happen in their life. The catch? Whatever was written was bound to come true. Lena, the 30-year-old journalist, was new in town. As a skeptic, she found the legend amusing and was curious to witness the town's reactions. On the eve of Friday the 13th, she headed to the local pub to immerse herself in the tales of the townsfolk. Last year began a man named Rick. I got a memoir that I'd find my childhood love and rekindle our romance. It happened just as the book predicted. Lena raised an eyebrow, intrigued but not wholly convinced. And what if you hadn't read the memoir? Would it still have come true? Rick shrugged. That's the mystery. No one's ever dared not to read. As the night went on, Lena heard various accounts, each more spine-tingling than the last. But she remained the skeptic, even joking about what her memoir might reveal. When she returned to her rented cottage, the clock struck midnight. To her astonishment, a tiny black book appeared on her desk. Its appearance was eerie, with shadows seeming to dance around it. Laughing at herself for being drawn into the town's legend, she opened it. The handwriting was a delicate scrawl. Lena will discover a hidden basement in her cottage where she will find memoirs dating back centuries, each written on the eve of Friday the 13th. Laughing it off, she decided to indulge the myth. She began searching her cottage and, to her surprise, found a trapdoor under her bed. Pulling it open, she was greeted with a dimly lit staircase. Lena descended, finding herself in a room filled with thousands of tiny black books. As she picked one up, dated from the 1800s, she read of a woman who would lose her husband to a mysterious illness. Another from the 1900s told of a man who would accidentally cause a fire that destroyed half the town. But it was the last book she picked up that stopped her heart. It was thicker than the others. And instead of one prediction, it had hundreds. Each was a prediction for every resident of Auburn. And all had come true. Panicking, Lena quickly looked for her name and found it. But instead of one entry, there were two. The first was the one she had read upstairs. The second read, Lena will become the keeper of the memoirs, forever trapped in the basement, writing the fates of Auburn's residents. As she read the words, the room darkened. The exit vanished. The weight of centuries of stories pressed upon her. Her hands, seemingly on their own accord, reached for an empty book and began writing the next memoir. Days turned into weeks. No one saw Lena again. Townsfolk whispered that she had left, debunking the legend as a journalist's gimmick. But every Friday the 13th, the residents of Auburn continued to receive their memoirs. The thought that lingers. Are we truly masters of our own destiny, or just characters in a story yet to be written? And if there's a book out there with your name, would you dare read it? The Forgotten Story. Amber was an avid collector of all things obscure. Antique dolls, strange music boxes, old journals, but most intriguingly, lost stories. Among the online community, she was renowned for uncovering long-forgotten tales and sharing them with the world. One night, while scouring an old bookstore in her town, she came across a curious leather-bound book with no title on its spine. The pages were yellowed, but the script was beautifully written. The shopkeeper, a wizened old man, mentioned that he found the book hidden away in the attic of the store. He couldn't recall ever seeing it before, and it wasn't in his inventory. He decided to give it to Amber for a mere $1, as if eager to rid his hands of it. Upon reaching home, Amber began to read the unnamed book. Stories were haunting tales of ghosts, witches, and cursed objects. But what caught her attention most was the narrative of a man named Nathaniel. The story detailed how Nathaniel discovered a peculiar radio that played only one channel. On this channel, a voice would predict unsettling events. The eerie thing was that all of these events, no matter how implausible, would come true. Reading late into the night, Amber felt a chill crawl up her spine. She dismissed it as just the product of a good creepy story until the last page. The final story was not like the others. It seemed incomplete. It began with a woman named Amber who found an old leather-bound book. As she read on, Amber's heart raced. The details were strikingly familiar, from the description of her apartment to the pattern of her nightgown. Terrified, Amber tried to put the book down, but she found herself drawn to the narrative. The story detailed how the book she was reading had a consciousness of its own, a spirit, and how it had a malevolent plan for its reader. She reached the last line written, "Amber will now hear a knock on her door." As if on cue, there was a soft, deliberate knock. Frozen in fear, Amber waited. The knock didn't come again. After what felt like hours, she approached the door, peeping through the eye hole. Nothing. Relieved, she opened a crack. Still nothing. She chalked it up to her overactive imagination and decided to get some sleep. She placed the book on her nightstand, intending to get rid of it the next day. But as she turned off the lights, she heard the faint static of a radio from the living room. Her heart pounding, Amber followed the sound, only to find an old radio, much like the one described in Nathaniel's story, sitting on her coffee table. She had never seen it before. The voice on the radio calmly said, "You can't escape the book, Amber. It's already a part of you." Suddenly, the radio went silent. Amber, paralyzed with terror, heard whispers all around her, echoing the tales from the book. The next morning, the radio and the book were nowhere to be found. She tried to convince herself that it was all a bad dream, but deep down she knew the truth, and she also knew she'd never be alone again. Amber moved out of her apartment, but wherever she went, strange occurrences followed. Clocks that ticked backward, mirrors that reflected another world, shadows that whispered, and every once in a while she would find that leather-bound book on her nightstand, its pages adding more to her story each time. She tried telling others, but nobody believed her, dismissing it as the product of an overactive imagination. And with time, Amber began to doubt herself too. Was it real, or was it all in her mind? It's said that Amber still roams, with the book always a few steps behind her. If you come across a leather-bound book with no title, it's best you leave it be. Some stories are best left untold. And here's the lingering thought. There are tales in the world that hold too much power, weaving realities into their narrative. What if our lives are just stories in someone else's book, waiting to be read?